Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing and Distribution. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 25 years.
I'm Ellie Blue. I'm the editorial and marketing director here at Microcosm. We are an independent mid-list publisher based in Portland, Oregon. We have 14 employees, over 650 titles in print with 20 to 40 new books per year, and we distribute thousands of titles from other publishers.
We started this podcast so that we can share what we've learned with newer publishers so that you can learn from our mistakes.
Or maybe you just want to understand the publishing industry. We can do piracy anytime.
Well, we shouldn't do piracy anytime.
Let's do piracy all the time. Every episode is the piracy episode.
This week, we are going to talk about how to figure out who is your reader.
Who is your reader?
Mm-hmm.
I often actually have trouble with this one because in my mind, I often envision very specific people to be my reader.
Right.
That's just where my brain goes to.
Interesting.
Which, isn't necessarily a bad strategy when you're writing or editing.
Right. If you think of a specific, archetype of person rather than a singular person.
Right. I mean, or, that you can have a person who represents the archetype. You can definitely, have your grandparent in the back of your mind and be like, what would they say to that turn of phrase?
Mm-hmm.
Or would they want a chapter on that?
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, who is the reader is a bigger question than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really comes down to thinking about who is the underserved and who is interested in the type of thing that you're writing about. And, what kind of attributes do they possess? How old are they? What other things are they interested in? Do they like Dungeons and Dragons? Do they like, gardening? Do they like going on hikes? Do they like LARPing contests?
I see what kind of book you're getting at.
It's a very interesting book. It's one book, all of those things. And then, from there you can sort of figure out, when you become a little knowledgeable and experienced, then you can sort of work backwards and be like, okay, well, these kind of stores service people like that. And, these are the proclivities of people that buy for those stores. So, you have to sort of work from there. But, that's a fairly advanced way of being. In the beginning, you really want to just say, if I'm writing fantasy, what kind of fantasy? What other fantasy books do my readers or potential would-be readers, what are they reading? What are they attracted to? What is it that's interesting to them about those books?
And I would put out a word of caution here to my fellow white ladies and white men too. If you yourself have a significant marginality, lean into that and assume that you're speaking to other readers like you. If you're a racialized person, if you have a disability, if you're a weirdo, if you have trauma or whatever, I would say let that speak to that in your reader. If you don't have any of those things, or if you haven't examined the ones that you have, that's kind of where you can run into trouble in figuring out who your reader is. And that's really where there's a lot of competition for readers who are so-called mainstream, the kind of cultural default norm people who haven't ever had to kind of examine parts of their identity.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a really hard time finding an audience if you're speaking from that part of yourself to those readers. And you're also going to be in great danger of alienating other potential readers who might get something out of your book if you're not assuming that your book is for them.
I'm not entirely following your vagary here, but let's look at maybe, so in a real case, I think what you're getting at is that, whereas the situation with the book American Dirt,
mm-hmm.
where a white lady wrote the narrative of, immigration in the United States and, received a beyond preposterous amount of advance to write this book. And then, according to one bookstore owner, every single employee at her store received 2 advanced reader copies of that book. Why they would each need 2 per person, no one knows. But, so it just meant that they were really pushing this as a major title, but obviously the author had no experience to speak of, so obviously she got a lot of things wrong and, just kind of, upset the people that would be her audience. And then in a series of hilarious parodies, people wrote things like, as a middle-aged Hispanic man, I wrote my latest book, The White Lady Garden Party, just to sort of sound off on the absurdity of writing about things that you don't know and can't know, and so while obviously it's it's definitely courageous, I guess, get outside of your comfort zone awkwardly and clumsily like that. It's definitely not gonna lead to the results that you maybe are intending.
But also, at the same time, I think, one time we had an author who was a white person and she was writing about bicycling, and she did a great job of sort of writing about, all the different sort of things that feminine people care about on bicycling, like carrying your children and doing your hair. And one thing I really appreciated about her research is that she was, interviewing other people and doing a lot of research, and she didn't just assume that people had, white person hair. She gave tips for different kinds of hair. And I think that is, a really important perspective to interrogate in yourself and to remember, is that if you're assuming that your reader is one way, your only readers will be that way, and everyone else will be mad if you happen to reach them.
The results are self-serving.
Yeah.
And then all the other aspects of your book have to really communicate that audience as the audience, because otherwise people are going to be upset about it.
We had an author recently who was really nervous about she had been doing a lot of work with her social group about, they had kind of a issue with racism in their group, and so she had been doing a lot of personal work and a lot of group work, and she was like, I'm paralyzed to write. I just am so worried that my writing will be unintentionally racist or exclusive, whether or not it's intentional doesn't matter. She's like, I'm just worried that I'm, what am I saying? Who am I saying it to? And my advice was write weirdo to weirdo, and from your heart, and the people that are also weirdos will come to your book and love it.
They'll find it, yeah. Mm-hmm. And and there is a weird cultural thing going on right now where everybody feels like they need to suddenly and immediately be attuned to all of the suffering in the world and resolve it single-handedly on their own, and then speak to it and write to it. And that isn't really a 5-minute process so much as it's, sort of a continued lifelong thing. And, I guess as such, you really want to step back, be aware, and, if you make a mistake, apologize and move on.
Yeah, and the final thing I would like to warn people against doing is the cis white person disclaimer, which goes exactly like this. I am a cis white person and I have a lot of privilege, and then often they'll list more privileges that they have. Not helpful. Right. You can be aware of that, and you can let that inform your work without making it about yourself. Yeah,
right. Because that is a very awkward way to center oneself in the narrative, whereas you would hopefully knowingly acknowledge that instead in the way you approach your writing. But these things and more can be your struggles as an author and as a publisher.
Fun times.
And on that note, thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub.
On Twitter at Microcosm.
On Facebook at Microcosm Publishing.
On Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
And here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.